Thanks, Mark. And thank you to our anonymous sponsor. Through some back channels, I know who you are, and I'll be in touch with you personally to thank you, but thank you so much. None of this is possible without the generosity of folks like you who support our work here day in and day out at IJS. So I promised you on Monday that when we rolled around to Thursday, we would begin to explore the import of recognizing our true nature and being able to live from that recognition for collective liberation, for the work of Tikkun Olam. And creating a more humane, just, compassionate, and loving society that affirms the humanity and sanctity of all of its members. We're going to get there, but first I want to look at a couple of sources. Our friend Rachel is going to drop the link to the source sheet for those of you who may want to follow along. I'm going to be teaching orally from the sources. And if you're an auditory learner, feel free to just listen and take it in, and trust that whatever needs to land in your heart will land in your heart. If you're a visual learner, feel free to follow along on the source sheet, but we're not going to screen share it because I really want to be able to see your face while I'm teaching. All week we've been exploring how we tend to forget who we truly are. It's not our fault. It's part of our evolutionary biological conditioning, right? And it's also a culturally impacted type of forgetfulness. And so yesterday we began to explore how we might awaken to our true nature, recognize our true nature, right? And the work really is the work of recognition, because we're not trying to get something we don't have. We're not trying to acquire something to fill a void in us. If it's true nature, then it's already in us. It's always been in us, and all we need to do is recognize it or discover it. Some people in this life alight on it, almost miraculously. But most of us have to work to recognize our true nature, because doing so goes against the grain of our conditioning. And we've been exploring the ways in which recognizing our true nature might liberate us from the constriction, the narrowness, the meitzar, right, of the ego, and its tyranny as well. Today we're going to look at that work from another couple of angles. We're going to explore it with greater depth through the sources, and then we're going to come home for a landing to explore the ways in which that work might help us to shape a just society, a humane society, a compassionate society, and move through our personal and collective practice toward a kind of promised land, a messianic era. So I actually want to begin at the beginning with Exodus chapter 5 in Egypt. We're going to take a little bit of a tour back in history, right? That's what we do at the Seder. We're going to do it together now, which describes what happened when Moses and Aaron came to Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go." And by the way, they weren't asking for Pharaoh to let the people go permanently. They were just asking for 3 days. Let us go for 3 days so we can celebrate a festival to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, our God, in the wilderness. And in Exodus 5 verse 2, Pharaoh says, "Who is Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh that I should heed his command to send away the Israelites? I do not know Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, neither will I send the Israelites away." In Hebrew, "Mi Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh asher eshma bekolo leshalach et Yisrael." And now the famous and oft-quoted line, "Lo yadati et Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, v'gam et Yisrael lo ashaleach," right? I don't know Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, and I will not send the Israelites away. So right here in this verse, we see that already embedded in Pharaoh's psyche, right, is a link between not knowing the absolute, not knowing divinity, and continuing to remain entrenched in an oppressive orientation to the Israelite people, right? I don't know Yud He Vav He, neither will I send the Israelites away. And, I've said this before in my teaching now for many years that, Yud He Vav He is actually a kind of mysterious name, but if we had to translate it in some way, given that it is a contraction, right, or a collapsing of was, is, and will be into a singular name, and given that, being or existing means that something is here, something is present, right? So we can call this name timeless presence. Timeless presence, I think, would be a good translation for Yud He Vav He, timeless presence. Pharaoh's saying, I don't know this timeless presence, right? And so, I'm not going to act in a just and kind and compassionate way. And then, he continues in dialogue with these two leaders, and Moses and Aaron say, the God of the Hebrews has happened upon us. Let us please travel a 3-day journey and sacrifice to Yud He Vav He, our God, lest God strike us with pestilence or the sword. Then the king of Egypt said to them, why, O Moses and Aaron, do you disturb the people from their work? Get to your labors, right? And so there's also, I think, a clear depiction or description here of the fact that when a person doesn't know timeless presence, which is to say the divinity within themselves, they also can't really see the divinity in another, right? To Pharaoh, the Israelites are just his playthings, right? They're his, they're his servants, they're his slaves. He can do with them what he wishes, and they're essentially objects, right? Why are you, Moses and Aaron, bothering the people by kvetching to me? Get to your labors. He doesn't even see Moses and Aaron as people. He certainly doesn't see the Israelites as people, right, as sacred beings. You with me? Give me thumbs up if you're with me. Okay. I love the greeting namaste. I spent about 10 months in Asia, and a lot of that time was in India. And just love that people greet each other namaste. What it means is the part of God in me sees the part of God in you. Isn't that beautiful? Right? That's not something Pharaoh could have possibly said. He couldn't have said that with any kind of sincerity or authenticity. Right? And going back to that piece from the Baal Shem Tov, but a part of it that we didn't look at a couple days back, he teaches that seeing that the exile in Egypt essentially happened because awareness vanished. Remember, what does Pharaoh say? Lo yadati. The verb yadati comes from the noun da'at, awareness. I am not aware of timeless presence. And the Baal Shem Tov says that's where the exile comes from, right? That's how a person can subjugate a whole people, because there's no awareness of true nature. And that, says the Baal Shem Tov, is a quality of spiritual exile. For the Israelites were under the sway of forgetfulness. Not only Pharaoh, right? They were too. Because when you're a servant working all day long, you don't have time to engage in spiritual practice and inquire into your true nature. You're just surviving, right? You're acting from impulse, from viscera, from a survival instinct, right? So we have this beautiful teaching here from Rabbi Kalonymus Kalman Epstein, who's known as the Ma'or Vashemesh, which was his magnum opus. He was a Polish Hasidic master in the 18th and 19th century. And there's a tradition in the mystical Jewish writings that actually before our world was created, there were other universes and worlds that were created and they were destroyed. Right? Kind of like the Hindu notion of the yugas, right? The yugas. Different eras and different worlds, right, that come into being and then they ultimately contract back to nothing and then expand back into existence and contract back into nothing. Very similar. So the Holy and Blessed One created prior worlds and destroyed them, saying these benefit me and these do not. That's a midrash, a classical midrash. It's not even a mystical teaching. It's from the exoteric Jewish interpretive tradition. This is the meaning of the matter, says our Hasidic teacher. When the worlds cascaded into being one after another, which is how Kabbalah understands creation happening, right? There's nothing, there's the divine nothingness. Whoops, that was my water bottle. And then out of that divine nothingness, something comes into being, but it's a cascade effect where God's self is cascading into ever coarser and form-bound forms of creation. So the Blessed One's divinity was forgotten, such that people reason that there is no master or sovereign, and each one said to herself, I will reign. The Aramaic is Ana Emloch. I'm going to be king. I'm going to be sovereign. I'm the master of the universe. I'm going to bend the universe to my will. I'm going to control other people so they do what I want them to do, right? I'm going to try and rearrange the circumstances of my life so I can experience only pleasure and never pain, only gain and never loss, only approbation and never disapproval. So when God's face is hidden in the world, which here is understood as an ontological process, right? An outgrowth of creation itself, that's just the default. That's just the default of our psyche, right? We revert to this attitude of I will reign. That's basically what the ego wants to do, It sees itself as the center of the world, wants to have things its way. Just notice what happens, right? When things don't go your way. Is there indignation? Is there anger? Is there protest? Is there, an attempt to fight back? I don't know about you, but when things don't go my way, it's not pleasant. And there's a lot of aversion and resistance that arises for me. And by the way, things mostly don't go my way, right? So, says our teacher, what's most important, therefore, is to know that the Blessed One is the foundation and root of all worlds. In other words, we have to come to know divinity, right, as the source of all, and to surrender ourselves before the divine, like Abraham, who said, I am dust and ashes. This is very, can be very hard for us Westerners, right? The idea that the ego somehow needs to be like pummeled. And I said yesterday, it's not even so important actually in the lineage in which I'm practicing that we get rid of the ego. We just have to be able to overcome this case of mistaken identity that we're under the sway of. That's all. We just can't begin to think that we are the ego, But says our teacher here, the whole world is sustained in such a person's merit. We must not behave collectively like the initial generations in which every person said, I will reign, such that we were destroyed. Okay. So ultimately he says this attitude is very destructive. It can destroy the whole world. It can destroy the whole world, right? Give someone a lot of power and influence, like Pharaoh, right? Or perhaps some politicians that we know of, right? Give someone who doesn't know their own divine nature and therefore can't see the divine in others a lot of power and influence, and they can do a lot of damage, right? They can destroy whole worlds. So hopefully we're beginning to see here how this ingrained narrowness of the ego, how its own self-protection, right? How its own self-centeredness and self-cherishing, right, actually has impact in the world. It's not just that we suffer when the ego is narrow and tight and contracted. We inflict suffering upon others, right? And Rupert Spira, who's a great Advaita Vedanta teacher that I really like. If you haven't had a chance to listen to any of his talks or his podcasts, it's really good. He says, over the millennia, humanity has struggled with deep and pressing problems, suffering in our hearts, conflict in our communities, war among nations, and the degradation of our planet. Not a moment passes without a major news outlet drawing attention to our deeply troubling times. These issues are typically given cursory explanations with little, if any, understanding of their shared root cause. As a result, our leaders look for peace in a negotiation between minds, which at best produces a fragile alliance. Since it is the nature of the mind to change, that alliance will inevitably come to an end. The only lasting peace within oneself and within our society must be founded on something that is prior to and independent of the mind. A deeper analysis reveals that these seemingly separate forms of disharmony are all symptoms of the prevailing worldview, which is founded upon the presumption of separation. This presumption claims that our essential self or being is temporary and finite. As such, each of us is an individual self that is separate from other people, animals, and nature. Once an individual considers itself a discrete and independently existing entity, all its thoughts, feelings, activities, and relationships will unfold in a manner that is consistent with this false belief. In fact, its every idea and activity will be an expression of this primary belief, thereby licensing behavior that violates the first principle of truth, namely the unity of being. All the conflicts between individuals, communities, and nations, and the exploitation and degradation of the earth can be traced back to the violation of a single principle, the fact that we share our being. Therefore, any remedy that does not address this primary cause will have at best only a temporary effect. The seeds of separation which gave rise to the crisis in the first place will remain subliminally imprinted in the remedy, and it will only be a matter of time before they sprout again into new crises. It is for this reason that many social movements have as yet failed to bring about the change they seek, even after decades of well-intentioned intervention. We must return to our primordial knowledge, which has been recognized throughout the course of human history. As early as the 7th century BCE, the words "Know thyself" were carved above the doorway to the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. In the 5th century BCE, the Greek philosopher Parmenides, considered to be the founding father of Western philosophy, suggested that everyone and everything derives its apparently independent existence from a single, uncaused and unchanging reality, infinite, undifferentiated being. At the same time in the East, the same understanding was expressed in the Upanishads as the individual self and the ultimate reality of the universe are identical, and echoed a few centuries later in Christianity as I and the Father are one. The underlying unity of being is the single principle upon which all the great religious, philosophical, and spiritual traditions are founded, each one tailoring it to the requirements of the time in which it was expressed. Being is experienced as the amness of ourself and the isness of objects in the world. Being whole, indivisible, perfect and complete, it wants nothing, seeks nothing, and resists nothing. It does not share the anxiety and sorrow that characterize our hearts and minds. That is, its nature is peace and happiness itself. In other words, peace and happiness are the nature of our being, and we share our being with everyone and everything. Let me say that sentence again. In other words, peace and happiness are the nature of our being, and we share our being with everyone and everything. As such, this understanding is not only the source of peace and happiness for which people long, but it is also the requisite basis for a just and peaceful society. At the level of society, we must live this understanding by bringing our actions, relations, and institutions into alignment with the unity of being. Before relating to a man or a woman, a Muslim or a Jew, a poor person or a wealthy one, relate to the essence within them. Because all of those other identities, right, are constructed. They're impermanent. They're changing, they're situational. Remember that you both use the same name to refer to yourself. You both call yourself I. The fact that you share your name is an intimation of the unity of being. You call yourself by the same name because you are the same being. Now, I'm not saying that, if everybody were to meditate all day long, we would have world peace and the end of racism and the end of homophobia and the end of gender-based discrimination and the end of war and the end of environmental degradation, right? I'm not offering a Pollyannish kind of invitation here or orientation. What I am saying is that if we could create educational systems and develop a new... To do that,
you'll need to turn off airplane mode.
Okay, somehow my phone was responding to what I was saying. Apparently, if I turn off airplane mode, we'll solve all our problems. But in all seriousness, what we need is a new educational system that isn't just trying to churn out cogs in the materialist machine, right? But that actually values the cultivation of the inner life and introducing youngsters to their true nature from a young age, right? And we also need a new science that doesn't reduce everything to the flat land of matter, right? Arguing that matter is the prime ingredient of reality, which, by the way, has been disproven by the cutting edge of quantum mechanics. We now know mathematically, right, through very precise calculations, that there is something beyond matter. Matter collapses, right, at a certain level. The lower you go, right, down, 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 eventually, and they've proven this mathematically, matter collapses. There is something beyond matter or underneath matter that allows matter to come into being, a substrate, as it were. Right? And the spiritual traditions of the world have been saying for millennia, what is it? Consciousness. Consciousness. Right? And the Jewish spiritual tradition as a non-Jewish, as a non-dual tradition has been arguing the same. Not everything is made of matter. Everything is made of consciousness. Okay? Now these are nice ideas. The question is, can we actually come to know that ourselves intimately, directly? Because if we're operating with the belief that everything is matter, everything can be reduced to matter, right? Well, matter is characterized by separation and boundary, right? This body and not that body, right? This community, not that community, right? My people, not your people, okay? But if we can experience consciousness as the prime reality, as the single reality, right, then it might be, this is just an invitation to check out in your own experience what's true, that all of those boundaries dissolve. Let's check it out, okay? Let's settle in. Now, as we're settling in, I also just want to affirm, right? We've only been doing this work together for 4 days. Even if you've been able to recognize something of your true nature, even if you've caught a glimpse, you may not feel the inherent spaciousness and freedom and happiness immediately. It may feel quite ordinary or even parav. The more we rest into our true nature, the more glimpses we catch, little by little, we begin to feel the inherent spaciousness, the inherent openness, the inherent connection of deep nature. I want to invite you right here and now to choose an anchor. It could be the rising and falling of your breath, if that feels like a good home base. It could be the coming and going of sounds. It could be the feeling of contact between your body and itself, right? Your hands touching one another, your hands touching your pants, your thighs, your skirt. Just coming into presence, setting an intention to be here now. beginning to stabilize the mind and the attention a little bit. The eyes can be open or closed, whichever feels more stabilizing and supportive. And in the context of this practice today, I'm just going to offer some questions, and your job is not to try and think your way through to an answer, but instead to notice what your experience is like in the present moment. Ultimately, the questions are meant to return us to the truth of our own experience. Question number 1. As you attend to sensations in the body, is awareness present? Number 2, if you let go of the idea that you are the doer, the one who has to arrange everything from within the internal control tower to avoid pain and seek pleasure and control external conditions to your liking. And if you let go of that notion of yourself as the manager, is awareness present? Number 3, as you notice sensations moving, changing, what are they arising in? Number 4, even as a sensation arises, moves, and then dissolves, what remains? unaffected by movement or change. Number 5, if you let go of preconceptions, presumptions, everything you've been taught in the past, and just focus on sensations in the present. Are they in any way separate from the knowing space in which they're arising? Can you find a hard and fast line between the two, between the sensations and the awareness? If you get lost in thought, you can repeat the same process, right? Just notice, what are the thoughts arising in? Even as thoughts change and move, is the space in which they're known changing or moving? And is the awareness, the knowing space, is it ever separate from the thoughts that arise in it? Or are they just expressions of its own activity and energy? So when we do this practice, we might say, okay, nothing inside of me is ever separate from this awareness. There's no hard and fast lines to be found. But certainly there's a hard and fast line to be found between me and the world, isn't there? So I want to invite you to open your eyes and look around at forms and colors and just ask, inquire, right? Letting go of all presumptions, everything you've been taught. Just noticing what's your actual experience here and now. Are these sights and forms and colors and shapes? Are they outside of your awareness or are they in your awareness? Can you find anything, in fact, in the world that's outside of your awareness? Just look around and notice. Right? This is engaged mindfulness. Try to let go of concepts and labels and just observe. And this is an inquiry you can take up throughout your day, here and there, when you remember. Just notice, is there anything I can find that's outside of my awareness? And as you look at the other people here, right? Are they outside of your awareness? Just check it out. As we turn back to Mark for Mourner's Kaddish.
Thank you, Sam. It's extraordinary series and set today. Friends, let's seal it and close this period of our time together, offering an opportunity for those who are grieving to recite the Mourner's Kaddish. You can put the name or names of those you're honoring today in the chat now or after we recite Kaddish. Thanks to Rachel for sharing the words of the Kaddish on the screen. And if you are joining me, I invite you to rise in body or in spirit. And you can unmute at this time. And if you're not reciting Kaddish, thank you so much for staying present for those who are and forming a minyan of comfort for them. Yitkadal, Kadash, Shemei Rabbah, Lama Dibra, Te, Vav, Phone,
ובמחול ובחיי
Hayet, Malbit,
בישראל
Ba'agala, Zman Karim, Amen. Shmei Rabba Mevarach, Anukri Alayla, Barach, Kala,
Bitchoman
V'Yitman,
ובתנשא
Nase,
ויתהדר
Yitale,
ויהלל
Yitala,
ויברכו ואלה מכל ברכתה ושירתה ופתחתה ונחמתה ובירם ביומה
Yesh
במשמיים
Lama
וחיו
Rabba Min Shemaya,
כל
Hayim
ישראל
Alayim,
ואמרו אמן
Israel Viru Amin,
ויעשה שלום עלינו
Yaseh Shalom
ישראל
Aleinu,
כל
Al
יושבי
Kol
תבל
Yisrael, V'chol Yoshvei
אמן.
Tevel, Viru Amen.
Amen.
Oh, Noah.
Amen.
It's good to see you.
Friends, thank you so much for joining us today. If you're leaving us now, just a reminder, this is our final session before taking a Pesach break. We'll be back on Wednesday, May 1st. We'll be led in practice by Rabbi Sarah Brandis of the Awakened Body, be joining us from Kibbutz Chanaton. As we will enter the Omer together, we'll look forward to that. Just a reminder, of course, you can avail yourself of all the opportunities for practice on our YouTube. In fact, I'm going to put a link in the chat Sam's series, 4 sits, are being collected as a playlist on YouTube. And so as you prepare, however you prepare for Passover, cooking, cleaning, or just meditating or engaging in practice, please revisit these, and all the resources will be posted there as well. So those who are leaving us, we wish you a Shabbat Shalom, a meaningful, sweet Pesach, of a liberating Pesach. And we hope to see you on the other side when we enter the Omer together. And for those who are staying on, of course, feel free to share reflections in the chat, questions. Wish we had much more time, but we have about 15 minutes, about 14 minutes to engage with Sam about today's teaching and about this week of teaching. So much, Sam, to touch on, aside from airplane mode. That's one of the go into the annals of great moments in daily sit history.
Yeah, we can save that for
we've had a number of those. So just a reminder, if people have questions, please put them in the chat rather than unmuting. I'll keep an eye out for that. First, I wanted to start with Sam. You offered a translation of Yud He Vav He. We started with the text from Exodus, where Pharaoh, who represents that archetype, right, of the unconscious, right, not knowing, case of mistaken identity, which is just like a great title for the whole series. I think you use that as well. We all suffer from a case of mistaken identity, of mistaking different aspects of our identity as our true self. A good shorthand for this. Anyway, you defined Yud He Vav He, and Pharaoh saying, who is Yud He Vav He? I don't know Yud He. Who is this Yud He Vav He? I don't know Yud He Vav He. And you translate it as timeless presence. So I wanted you to start there, and just by and basically saying, this is what we all emerge from. Everything emerges from that, from timeless presence. So I want to invite you to start with that. Maybe say a few words about that, or whether you have other favorite loose translations for that untranslatable name of God.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. The first thing I just want to say is I'm only speaking from my own experience, right? And ultimately, we can't know what lies beyond the mind, beyond our own consciousness. So what that means is that anything that we experience is, in and of itself, conditioned by our perception, right? So please don't walk away thinking that I'm talking about, absolute truth here. Or anything like that. I'm just offering a particular view that I think is really helpful in breaking free of suffering in the confines of egoic grasping and the attitude of ana emloch, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be king, or I'm going to be queen, or I'm going to rule. Which only makes us miserable. So, we saw the teaching of the Piazetzner Rabbi yesterday about how God's essence is present within all of reality, And if that's true, and this is a claim the Hasidic masters are making over and over and over again throughout the generations, beginning with the Baal Shem Tov, who passed away in 1760, then that divine essence is present within us too. And somehow we've all been conditioned by our educational system to think of God as the sky god, right? A being, a very powerful being, a being. But the way mystical traditions the world over, and I first encountered this in Judaism within Kabbalah and Hasidism, right? Understand God as not as a thing per se, because a being is a thing, right? But as a field of pure beingness, right? Unadulterated, unalloyed being, as absolute existence. Okay. And I think that the name we give Yud-He Vav-He, which, by the way, according to the mystical tradition, isn't the thing itself. It's still an epithet. And we talked about this yesterday, about how we're pointing to something that transcends language and concepts, right? But it's a good pointer toward this divine essence within each of us, because it suggests that we're looking for something that collapses time. That collapses time, and that is isness itself. And the only thing inside of myself that I can find that matches that description, right, is this timeless presence, or pure awareness, or pure consciousness. And when I see that pure consciousness is devoid of
To
a
do that,
name,
you'll need to turn off airplane mode.
All right, let's all take a moment right now and make sure we are turning off airline mode, and let's see what happens.
I put my phone on airplane mode thinking it would be a distraction, but there you go. There you go. But when I look in all seriousness, when I look into that consciousness, when I allow that consciousness to know itself, right, and rest back into itself, just be really itself. What I see is it's devoid or empty of form, name, boundary. It doesn't speak. It's inherently silent. It doesn't move, right? It's inherently peaceful and never agitated. Then I see it's actually beyond time. It's timeless. It has no beginning and no ending. And it's not space or bound by space, because it's the very container in which space is known and arises. So it also transcends space, So what I would say is, we can't know the absolute beyond our own minds, but within our own minds, right, we can experience Yud-He Vav-He directly. We can experience Yud-He Vav-He directly at the depth dimension of the mind, right? At the depth dimension of the mind. At the surface level of the mind, everything's changing. Everything has a discrete beginning, middle, and end. Right? Everything is arising in space. Everything is bound by time. Everything is conditioned, dependent. But that's at the surface level.
Yeah.
And though none of that stuff is separate from the depth dimension, remember that metaphor of the ocean, it's a single ocean. The waves are not ever separate from the ocean. The ocean doesn't say, well, there's an inside and an outside. It just knows everything to be ocean. At the same time, right, the true refuge lies in that which transcends space and time and isn't subject to the ravages of space and time.
There are many good questions in the chat, Sam. I'm having a little bit of a hard time choosing among them. I'm going to try to distill it into this. One of the things, what you said about namaste, about that being such a beautiful, in terms of practice, to keep this consciousness at the forefront of our awareness on a regular basis in daily interaction. That's a beautiful way to do it. I'm thinking about other traditions within Jewish tradition about, where we can find something like that, including I've heard about people seeing the aleph on people's faces, right? The nose and the eyes and the mouth, as a recognition. But can you suggest something that would help us do that throughout the course of the day? And just tacking onto that, because there are people who are saying, like, how to deal with the quote, the pharaonic, aspects of ourselves and others, that we're dealing with, how to acknowledge that, right?
How to deal with those difficult people who want to reign, right?
Right. People
And
want
those
to
parts
reign.
of ourselves that, are tyrannical, or
Right.
the ways in which we even tyrannize ourselves, right?
Right.
Out
How do we
of
deal
again,
skillfully
space of
with the
mistaken
Pharaoh?
identity. Yeah, great question. Yeah, first of all, in terms of the first question, how do I see this in other people? Well, the first step is to see it deeply inside yourself,
Hmm.
right? You can't really see it inside of other people if you don't see it inside yourself, right? In other words, you have to have some sort of a direct recognition that there's a part of you that has no name, has no form, is inherently peaceful, inherently open, inherently spacious. And when you see that it's not personal, it's not really my awareness, right? It's just awareness. And you come to recognize that that's actually the deep nature of everybody, beyond their name, beyond their form, beyond their appearance, beyond their role, beyond their title, beyond their persona, beyond, their gender, their skin color, all of those things. So that's the first step, and then it becomes much easier to look at other people and just know inherently, innately, spontaneously, that's who that person really is. Even if they're angry right now, even if they're, acting in a kind of oppressive way, a reactive way, we can divide between their behavior, which is an outgrowth of their own case of mistaken identity and their own fear of the dissolution of the ego or any threat to the ego, right? Or any disappointment that the ego might experience, we can say, yeah, that's all happening. That's true on the level of conditionality and phenomenality. But who is this person really deep down, right? Oh, right. They are pure awareness, or they are loving awareness. I've been trying to do that actually. This is very hard. It's been challenging, and I had to grapple with a lot of my own conditioning, especially tribalistic impulses that I experienced very strongly after October 7th, But I've been trying to remember, even Hamas, and this is maybe a controversial statement, and please accept my apology if this is activating, right? They're acting out of conditioning. People who choose to attack other people unprovoked, right, and engage in that kind of brutality, they're deeply, deeply, deeply caught in illusion about who they are. But deep down, they're godly people. They just don't know it. They don't feel it, right? So that doesn't mean we should invite them into our backyard or not condemn them, or not defend ourselves against them, or not try to dismantle their capacity for doing the same kind of thing in the future. That's not what I'm saying. The question is, do we demonize them? Right? Do we demonize them? Do we dehumanize them? And it's like that with the difficult people in our lives. Hopefully no one's doing anything like that to you personally, right? In any way, shape, or form. But next time I'm totally going to turn off my phone.
Still on it.
We need a little
That's
bit
great.
of
It's-
we need a little
it's-
bit of comic and humor.
Sam, it's
Comic relief.
great. It's
Please try
great.
again.
And I'll just say one last thing, which is when we behave in a way that's oppressive toward others, I'm guilty of that, right? When we're reactive, there's a way in which we can say, I'm such a bad person, I'm terrible, I'm always going to be stuck in this horrible pattern. Or we can say, that was my conditioning. It's painful. And that's not who I really am deep down.
Right. There's a lot there, Sam, in terms of, I think, understanding of the Jewish understanding of tshuva, right? Which ideally doesn't come from shame, which would be a sense of that is who I am, what I did, and an awareness that we're more than what we have done, right? More than our actions. We're at times, I want to respect that time, sadly, because this is unbelievably deep and rich. Just thank you on behalf of everyone, Sam, for this really exquisite teaching, powerful teaching, so important. Thank you for what you shared at the end, with which I concur. And just remind people that, These teachings are rich and deep. The materials, the written materials that Sam shared are rich and deep, and I encourage everyone to spend time with them in the days leading up to Passover, but also during Pesach itself. And to remind people also that we move into the Omer with the theme of the week, whether, those of you who've done awareness in action, those of you who are doing it, those of you who have not done it. Theme of the week is chesed, which we at IJS offer as loving connection, as immersion in the kind of awareness that I think you're offering us as the path of liberation, Sam, and that we spend a full week really with that theme of immersing in the world of non-differentiation, of oneness, of deep connection, that is a loving, peaceful state. So that may that be so, for Sam, for you, for your family, for all of us, and for our people, for our suffering people, and for our suffering world. Thanks to Rachel for holding our space today. Thanks to our anonymous donor for supporting our practice. Thanks to that beautiful dedication to you, Sam, so richly deserved. And wishing everyone a Chag Sameach, Shabbat Shalom and a Chag Sameach. We'll see you Wednesday, May 1st.
Thanks, everyone. Take good care. Chag Sameach. All the very best.